There we
Oh,
go.
yes. Can you see my
Yes.
presentation full screen? Yeah. Okay.
Beautiful.
So thanks, everyone. I feel like all my professional accreditations might be stripped as a result of the quiz answers in a minute, but we'll see about that. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of my work in the technologies that are coming around road safety and what role they might play in reducing the risk of harm on the road. So start off with a little bit about me. So I worked at TRL for many years. I talked a little about it as led their human factors research. So which question was it? Question 5 was a very topical one for me. I was looking at the effects of distraction, fatigue, alcohol, drugs, infrastructure, training, vehicle technologies on driver behavior. And it was quite a prominent role, but I always felt like I was someone who was telling people, you don't want to drive like this, you want to drive like that. And it was sort of quite a negative perspective on the world. And what I saw was the kind of emergence of automated vehicles. And I felt that was something that could have a massive impact on the potential for improvements in road safety, particularly, and we'll come to the answer in due course, but particularly when we think about the extent to which human errors play a role in contributing to road crashes. So I led many projects related to automated vehicles. One of the big ones was one called Gateway, which is the image in the top right there, where we tested a variety of different automated vehicles in Greenwich with members of the public in public environments. And it wasn't about demonstrating the technology as such. It was more about understanding what people's reactions to it were and what the potential might be for deploying those automated vehicles in a commercial setting. And that was 2015, 2016 now, so over 5 years ago. In the bottom left, we also did the world's first grocery delivery by automated vehicles. So this little delivery truck arrived outside your front door, and you could come out with your smartphone, open the correct compartment from the back of the truck and take out your groceries. And yeah, that was the world's first delivery by automated vehicle. And then I had a couple of years working for Bosch. Bosch, most people think about kind of garden tools and washing machines, but they are the world's largest supplier of automotive components. But a lot of their business comes from supplying parts related to combustion engines, fuel injectors and engine management systems and the like. And clearly with the shift to electric vehicles, that needs to change. So my role was thinking about how the organization might evolve away from that dependence on combustion engine components and towards new products and services associated with city mobility. So where would it make sense to deploy automated vehicles, and how would Bosch work with a city to make that happen? So yeah, that's my background. And then since then, been working for myself for the last 2-3 years, largely advising companies, government, Europe about the potential and benefits and challenges of connected and automated vehicles. So I want to kind of go back to the start. It was 11 years ago that Google announced they're working on a self-driving car program. They put out this blog post on the right, stating that they covered 140,000 miles of driving with automated vehicles around the streets of the Bay Area, San Francisco. And at the time, that was incredible, a fantastic achievement. And it was motivated by road safety. So the founder of the group had lost his best friend in a road crash, aged I think they were 19. And his motivation for working on self-driving vehicles was to prevent such tragedies happening in future. So that was 2010. And they've now covered more than 20 million miles of driving with automated vehicles, but they haven't rolled out quite as quickly as certainly was expected in 2010, or even when we were working on the Gateway project back in 2015. So you're more likely to see these slightly less starry-eyed, kind of more negative stories about automated vehicles, fatal incidents involving Teslas with levels of automation, incidents involving the Uber test vehicles, resulting in a pedestrian fatality. So everyone's slightly more skeptical about the potential that such vehicles might achieve. And I think what that reflects is something talked about in technology circles called the Gartner hype cycle. And the Gartner hype cycle refers to the kind of sequence that a technology goes through as it's introduced. So you get an innovation trigger. Someone comes up with a great idea and everyone gets very excited, thinks about all the wonderful applications it might have. And yes, it breeds a huge amount of expectation about what that technology might achieve. Then everyone realizes, oh gosh, we've got to change all these regulations. We've got to develop all these additional technologies to accompany this. People have got to adapt their lifestyles to accommodate this technology. So expectations drop and you get into this, what they call the trough of disillusionment. And gradually, as all those problems are resolved, you ascend the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. All good management consultant speak, but I think it's quite a helpful guide to thinking about what happens with new technologies. And I've been tracking where automated vehicles probably sit on this hype cycle. And if we start kind of 2010, start of the Google self-driving car project, I think 2015, 2016 was the time of peak hysteria about the potential for automated vehicles. And I think 2020, 2021, particularly in the light of COVID, you know, a lot of testing stopped at that time. I think that was the trough of disillusionment. But I think now we're starting to get to an understanding of where and how automated vehicles might actually have commercial uses and actually deliver a return on all the investment that's gone into their development and production. And thankfully, Gartner themselves, who produced this hype cycle, agree with my reading of the situation. So in July 2021, they produced their latest update of the hype cycle, and autonomous vehicles were here just at the dip and starting to ascend into a situation where they can start to be productive, start to become part of our everyday lives. It's not going to happen overnight, but yeah, start to see them having genuine commercial viability. And so today, yeah, I mean, Waymo, which is what the self-driving car project from Google became, they are now operating automated vehicles without any driver at the controls, as a taxi service in Phoenix, in Arizona. And then also shifting, they've just started working in San Francisco. They're about to go to New York as well, not just with these Chrysler Pacifica vehicles, but also with the Jaguar I-Pace. So yeah, starting to operate genuine commercial services. And in the light of COVID as well, I think a lot of the automated vehicle developers are shifting towards the movement of goods. So the likelihood of there being trucks carrying packages to their destination using automated vehicles is a genuine prospect. We all know there are driver shortages, so maybe automated vehicles can help address those driver shortages and start the movement of goods safely and efficiently using automated vehicles. So yeah, nothing has happened as quickly as was expected, but often with innovation, things never do. Everyone gets excited, but then you have to deal with all the practical problems. I think there are technology issues, there are regulatory issues, and there's also the public perception issues, making sure people understand the potential, the benefit, the safety that goes along with the deployment of these vehicles. And that's really important because if we look at the deaths per year, and again, you know, that was, what was it, question one, the number of deaths that there are around the world each year. This is the figures for the European Union. Up to about 2010, 2011, they were decreasing year on year. But for the past 10 years, the deaths have been essentially stagnant. They've essentially been about the same level over the last 10 years. And ironically, that coincided with the global Decade of Action for Road Safety from the United Nations. So something has gone on whereby the improvements in road safety that we were seeing are not happening today. I think there's a number of reasons that might be the case. I think one is the role of smartphones. So since iPhone came out, 2007, 2008 kind of time, and since about 2010, they've been essentially ubiquitous, at least in global north countries. And the demands they place on us in terms of our attention, I think are having an effect on drivers, on pedestrians, and the risk of collisions from that perspective. I also think there's been a big growth in the use of SUVs. And of course, they're larger, heavier vehicles, they're less maneuverable. So when there are collisions, the impacts tend to be higher energy and therefore more severe for anyone involved in those crashes. So although vehicles have tended to get safer because they are larger and less maneuverable, those impacts are potentially more frequent, more severe than they had been previously. So hopefully automated vehicles offer us a way in which that descending trajectory might be restored. And just a note on the pandemic, even though traffic went down dramatically in 2020, the number of collisions per vehicle mile traveled, so the rate of crashes actually went up. Although the numbers of fatalities went down, there were more crashes than you might have expected if it would just decrease proportionately. So the actual risk on the road increased, and that's probably because on quieter roads, people were driving faster, taking more risk, and getting themselves into trouble as a result. So yeah, hopefully automated vehicles can help contribute to restoring that downward trajectory. So just in closing, thinking about what it means for this project and what it means for young drivers in particular. Although we're starting to see those commercial deployments, it's not going to have a big impact on road safety. The fully automated vehicles aren't going to have that impact in the short term. Over the next 5, 10, 15 years, for sure, they can start to deliver those improvements in safety. But what we have seen is that all of the development work that's gone into making vehicles drive for themselves is leading to better driver assistance systems. So the sensors, the cameras, the data that we get from vehicles now enables us to develop better driver assistance systems that directly contribute to reductions in the number and severity of crashes. Got to be careful there though, because those tend to be present on high-end, expensive vehicles first, which are typically not the vehicles that younger drivers have access to. So it takes a while for those features to filter down to the sorts of vehicles that younger drivers will have access to. We also have better analytics, so we understand how people are driving, and that has a potential impact for insurance policies. So pay as you drive, pay how you drive insurance policies can be used as tools to help encourage drivers to adopt safer driving practices. So driving at times when it's safer, driving at speeds that are safer, driving on roads that are safer. So that is one tool that we can use to help influence drivers to behave in ways that are associated with greater safety. And then lastly, excuse
me, Nick. I've lost all vision at the moment. Has anyone else? I can hear you, but I can't see anything.
Oh, sorry,
I can still see. Yeah, it's still working for me. I'm just having a look if you've done anything. Yeah, it might just be maybe an internet problem your end, John, maybe.
Oh.
You can hear us, yeah?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, John. Just to conclude, I'm really on my very last point now. So sorry. Maybe when I finish, you can figure out what's going on. But just to close, really, the potential for deploying these vehicles gives us a chance to think about how and why we use roads in the way we do. What vehicles do we use? Why do we use them? What does that mean for kind of active travel? Can we change the way we use our roads to encourage the use of cycling, the use of scooters, the pedestrians? reduce that perception of danger and encourage people to use roads safely and sustainably. And one key aspect of this is, as we shift to electric vehicles, government is going to lose huge amounts of fuel duties that we pay through buying our fuel, and the vehicle duties that we pay each year as our road tax. So in replacing those duties, is there some form of road user charging scheme that helps us to use roads in a more efficient way, in a safer way, that can help achieve reduced risk on the roads? So although automated vehicles aren't going to have that dramatic impact in the short term, I think in some of the ways that they've changed our thinking about the way we use our roads, and some of the associated technologies that they've brought about, are going to have that shorter term impact that can help improve road safety. So that was it. I hope there's a sort of few interesting discussion points in there, and yeah, I hope I've got some of these questions right. Otherwise, I'm going to feel very embarrassed. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. Yeah, that was it was actually very interesting. I'm glad also we got it recorded, so I can go back and sort of really marinating on information again. Really, great. So thanks a lot. Do you think that there will ever be a time when driving sort of manually for a car will be completely abolished, or do you think there will always be a legal right or an expectation whereby we can still drive ourselves? Do you think there'll ever be a crossing point?
I think that's very unlikely. I think it won't happen in my lifetime, nor the lifetime of anyone on the call, to be honest. I think I can imagine a state where it's more expensive for you to drive yourself, because if we know that it's human drivers that are responsible for the most risk, and we know that automated vehicles are safer, just as we do with insurance today, if you want to behave in ways that are associated with higher risk, you might have to pay for that privilege. But I think it would be very unlikely that there would be a situation where no one is allowed to drive a human-driven vehicle as we understand them today in the near term.
So those sort of classic cars which have no safety features whatsoever, do you think they'll always be allowed to some? Yes. Most cars will have, I'm assuming most cars in the future will have increasing automation and safety features that effectively co-pilot the car at minimum, but there'll always be a room for people to kind of drive a 1950s soft top convertible or whatever. And and
I think as automated vehicles do come in and they can do more of the driving for you, I think the sort of track days and the chance to kind of go and drive in a sporting way will grow. Just like if people used to ride horses to get around, they tend to do that less today, but people still love to ride horses and enjoy that on courses that make more sense to do that. So I think human driving will be here for a long time yet, but it will evolve in ways that deliver better safety and sustainability.
So in short, there'll be a need for road code for many years to come, basically.
Definitely.
So
yes. And for John and for the Institute of Advanced Motorists to help improve driving techniques.
I think that's what's quite interesting. As someone who's trained up as a driving instructor in the past, which I have done, and going through the motions of how we have to teach sort of road safety and driver safety through the learning and then exam process in order for drivers to use the roads in the United Kingdom, I don't think necessarily perhaps we're not moving quick enough in terms of looking at where automation sits in the sort of that training process, because obviously, as you rightly say, Nick, even though perhaps for young people they're not going to have the access to these vehicles because of the cost implications towards that, it's still they're still going to need to bring in that within the training before the examination process, and I guess that links also to the theory part of it as well. I know when they brought in the changes recently, which was about being able to follow a sat nav, you now have to do that as part of your test, and if you cannot do that, you fail the exam, and that is part and parcel of kind of looking at following that's automation, isn't it? You know, we're following a route, we're following a guidance. So it's interesting that perhaps that's something that needs to be considered on, obviously, that's, you know, very much a policy issue, but looking at how, you know, they bring that into the training process, the learning process, when people are actually looking to learn to drive.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned the potential risks that smartphones pose in terms of distraction. There is a flip side to that, which is that they also offer a way that roads operators and local authorities can communicate with drivers in an effective manner and potentially improve road safety. So, for example, people know about smart motorways and the dangers if someone has to stop in a live lane. Now, if you could communicate to all drivers upstream of that stopped vehicle via a smartphone screen to say, lane 1, obstruction, slow down, move lane, that could potentially save lives and improve, you know, the efficiency of roads and reduce the potential for those kind of catastrophic crashes that have happened. And that's something that is accessible to essentially all drivers. It's not, you don't have to wait for the new vehicles to come in and you know, then gradually come down in price enough so that your average Joe can get access to them. So yeah, I think there's a lot that could potentially be achieved there, mindful of the fact that that also brings risks of distraction. So you'd have to build in restrictions on the phone to make sure people weren't misusing that technology and only gaining the road safety benefit from it.
Do you seems to me like there's always I suppose it's always been true, but older people tend to have more experience in the road, but also more money, so they can actually buy the safer vehicles, the nicer vehicles, whereas the younger people who are more inexperienced, they are often driving around in less safe vehicles. So there's that kind of that real inequality there, that kind of paradox. And I mean, do you think that will do you think that dynamic will always be there? I mean, in terms of actually the people that need probably the safety the most actually have the less access to it. And do you think that AVs or technology will ever kind of ameliorate that to any great degree, or is it many generations away from that kind of really being the case, when young people can benefit from the safety that richer older people can get?
Well, I think there is a lesser tendency for younger people to want to learn to drive to some degree, and so that they might be early adopters of automated vehicles and therefore get that benefit sooner, I think is quite likely. So yeah, probably, but you know, that you could fulfill all of your mobility needs with automated vehicles, as I say, is a long way away. And you're thinking particularly about rural communities, you know, that people will need cars for a long time. And so yeah, that need to learn to drive will remain.
I was going to ask about also pedestrian safety, because I know there's been some moves to actually make, if a pedestrian or anyone who outside of the car is hit by the vehicle, there is now some technology which is coming into play which actually makes that impact less severe, and kind of is a mitigating kind of technology. I mean, is there anything that you know about that in terms of how that's developing, or what kind of how that is advancing in terms of becoming more of a mainstream technology?
There's a thing called the General Safety Regulation, which is a very dry sounding thing, but it's a European directive around what technologies vehicles have to have fitted to them. And included in that is a whole suite of measures, one of which is about pedestrian detection, and that being part of the NCAP ratings as well. So the vehicle will need to be able to detect pedestrians to get that 5-star rating that they all want to have. But it also includes things like the potential for alco lock fitment. So they won't necessarily have alco locks, but all cars need to have the potential to be fitted with one, which is a system that's been used effectively in other countries for allowing drink drivers to return to their vehicles once they've completed their ban, just as that kind of reassurance that they won't be driving drunk, have that alco lock fitted. Other technologies like driver monitoring, so making sure drivers aren't fatigued, distracted. Speed limiting, so that the vehicle is able to restrict speed to the speed limit that applies on whatever road you're on. All those kind of measures that are coming in, and I think still up in the air slightly whether UK will actually adopt the general safety regulation because of Brexit and whatever else. But I think it's quite likely that we will. I mean, that all the measures make sense. They make economic sense, if
100%.
nothing else. You know, that crashes on the road have an economic cost, and if we can reduce them, we can capture some of that benefit, perhaps. So, lots of potential, but you'll need action.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some displays where cars actually have external airbags. So if someone comes into contact with the crumple zone or the bonnet of a car, then actually the airbag will deploy externally, therefore saving, you know, the young children or people that hit on the road, crossing the road or whatever. They actually have protection. They're not hitting the car at full speed, or so that kind of stuff is interesting. And yeah, I think as well, like you mentioned, like speed limiting. It feels like even if there's always ability for us to drive ourselves manually in a way, the technology is almost shepherding us down a path whereby it almost makes us robots anyway. Like it's removing the ability for us to have choice and autonomy, whereby we can't go across the speed limit. You know, certain things that basically we are still driving sort of in a nominal sense, but actually a lot of the technology around us is almost cocooning us and preventing us from doing anything that would the system would deem unsafe or dangerous or reckless, which is interesting really, because it doesn't mean that the car is fully automated, but it makes it impossible to drive without adopting what it's asking us to do.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of people know about aviation. There's a difference in philosophy between Boeing and Airbus. And Boeing, you can if as you apply the controls, it will do what you ask it to, but it will warn you if you're doing something that's going to endanger the aircraft. In an Airbus, you as you apply the controls, the computer is figuring out what it is you're intending to do. And if you're doing something that puts the aircraft at risk, it will prevent you from doing that. And so what you've described is sort of more towards the Airbus mode, where the vehicle is saying, okay, I know there's a pedestrian ahead. I'm going to slow you down because it appears that you haven't seen that pedestrian. And yeah, that kind of proactive safety management is, I think it's a good direction to follow, but we need to make sure that's all being introduced safely and monitored appropriately.
It definitely feels like that's the difference between America and Europe. You kind of got the American, you know, the Boeing is much more like, you know, you can sort of do what you want. Obviously, there are maybe some caveats to that and certain warnings, but you still have the license to do it. Whereas the Europeans are much more like, no, you're going to be restricted and you can only do it within certain parameters. So it's an interesting kind of philosophical difference there in how they're engineering their entire regulation and their entire technology.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was really interesting, Nick, and I really appreciate, you know, taking the time to share that with us. And you know, I said I'll be watching it again because I think there's a lot there to take in, really.
Sure.
Does anyone have any further questions, or we could?
I mean, I'd like to just go back to an earlier point you made, Nick, really, which is about action, and I think that's something to take away from this today, is actually how this links to kind of what we're doing in terms of our delivery and the UPS RoadCode program, because actually that's where we're at with young people, and part of the extra work we do around the community challenges is where, you know, young people can have an impact, whether that's locally or wider than that. And I think this is something that actually we could look to take forward potentially about how young people can be more vocal and interested in terms of what that future of road safety look like, because it ultimately will impact them, as you rightly say. You know, it's not necessarily going to impact the people in this room, it's going to impact future generations when the technology gets there, and making those roads as safe as possible. And you know, looking back to what's just happened at the COP summit in the last couple of weeks and how young people have been really engaged in that in terms of climate change, I think that's something that potentially could be pursued here in terms of young people's involvement in looking at what the shape of that road safety will look like in terms of this technology and automated vehicles and so on.
Yeah, and sort of almost a tangent to what I was saying previously, I think the way young people can have that impact is to make demands of the local authorities and of the planning organizations. You know, when new roads are built or when roads are renovated, that they demand that they're built in such a way that supports safe use by younger people, and often that will be walking and cycling. And you know, I think it's 2/3, 3/4 of local authorities have declared climate emergency. So in doing so, they should be encouraging people to use those more sustainable travel modes. But for people to use those sustainable travel modes, they need to feel safe doing it. And that means building the infrastructure to support that safe use, and for parents to feel comfortable that their children are walking into town or cycling into town, that they'll do so safely, and they won't get closed past, they won't get cut up at a junction. So making sure that infrastructure is designed to support that objective safety and subjective safety. Not only is it safe, but it feels safe, is really important. And parents, young people have to make sure that local authorities, councils are held to account to make sure they're delivering on the commitments that they've made around sustainability.
I mean, one thing I'll just add on is that one thing I suppose I always was concerned about was that as the technology continues to develop and get more advanced, that does it almost, because you'd hope therefore by sort of by proxy that road deaths and injuries come down, and rather than stop plateauing, that almost the need for road awareness training and road awareness almost becomes less, because the numbers are sort of almost less urgent. And I suppose really listening to what you've been saying there is there'll always be a need for some level of road safety awareness training when people are young, because it doesn't matter if the numbers are sort of going downwards and continuing to decline, because you still need that fundamental awareness when you're young, to be able to know that the road is a dangerous place, even if it maybe doesn't seem like it, because roads are, there's speed limiters and it's almost impossible to crash, etc. These are still weapons which can be misused, or things can go wrong. And so I think in some ways it's almost probably even more pertinent that the awareness and the education is still happening, even when the technology continues to get better. Because if you don't do that, then actually you'll probably end up with situations whereby your accidents are happening or things are happening which wouldn't have happened previously, but because people didn't have the awareness instilled into them when they were young, that they didn't realize they were so exposed. I think that kind of thing happens quite often with the way in which things advance. You forget the prior lessons, and you always think, and there's always value in having those prior lessons, the history really of that kind of awareness brought to consciousness.
I mean, lots of organizations are committed to what they call Vision Zero. So the idea that there should be no fatalities or serious injuries on roads. But to achieve Vision Zero, you've got to think about drivers, you've got to think about vehicles, you've got to think about the infrastructure, you've got to think about other road users. And so, just because you've made progress in one area, you can't forget about the progress in the other, because you want to get to zero. That's your focus. You've got to address all the areas you can to ensure that risk is minimized. All the while, you still want people to travel. We want people to get around. We want people to get education, get jobs, get healthcare, see their friends. All those good things that transport provides. But we shouldn't feel at risk when we do those things. We got to address it in all the ways possible.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot for that, Nick.